for that kind introduction, and I'd like to thank the association for inviting me here tonight. The purpose of this presentation is to share my understanding of the surface scatter of an archaeological site I call Knapper's Point. The site has not been excavated. All the artifacts I'm going to show you tonight are from the surface, collected from the surface. Surface scatter is just simply the artifacts, stone tools, broken stone tools, pieces of stone tools, pottery, and sometimes metal goods that are scattered across the site. It's really important in archaeology, especially these days, to acknowledge that there are different ways of knowing. To me, an artifact is just a fact. I dig up a hefted biface over the ground, and to me, it's just something that I measure, I draw, I photograph, I document its location, put it in a plastic bag, scribble all the details on about it, and later on I analyze it with a bunch of other artifacts. But that's not what archaeology is to the indigenous folk. To an indigenous archaeologist, an artifact is a sacred ancestral relic with profound spiritual and cultural significance. It's about their identity. Rather than measuring it, well, they could measure it, I'm not saying they don't, but in addition to doing that, they worship the artifact and they wrap it in a red piece of cloth. You'll notice on the front table I put some of the artifacts from Knapper's Point on that table, and you'll notice that there is red cloth on the table. One of the requirements of the current Mi'kmaq population is that their artifacts be presented along with red cloth. An indigenous archaeologist celebrates his culture with the artifacts, and he discusses it with his community or her community, and in terms of legends and wisdom of the elders. It's not a fact. It's not something they try to analyze and turn into evidence-based conclusions. From a Mi'kmaq point of view, my approach to archaeology is a form of colonialism. From my perspective, I am doing evidence-based research. These differing perspectives have sparked a significant political debate all across Canada, and we're in the process. Archaeology is changing. In the province of Nova Scotia now, you can't get a permit to excavate without Mi'kmaq support and participation. So most research in archaeology, traditional research in archaeology, evidence-based research in archaeology has been discontinued. Of course, there's still lots of archaeology going on to clear areas for major development projects, but research archaeology is essentially gone. There's a guy, a Mi'kmaq person, who came up with this concept of two-eyed seeing. His name's Albert Marshall. He suggested that what we should be doing in archaeology is not just evidence-based archaeology and not just indigenous-based archaeology, but a combination of the two. And that's fine. It works well under some circumstances. A really good example of that is the legend of the whale and the beaver and the creation of the Minas Basin. Beaver built a big dam from Cape Split over to the other side, and whale didn't like it, and he slapped his tail, created a tidal wave, and wiped out the beaver dam and created the Minas Basin. Well, there's a guy down at the Bedford Institute, a guy named Shaw, who went out, did all the radiocarbon dating around the Minas Basin, and came up with an estimate on when the Minas Basin was formed, and that's like 3,500 years ago. And it's consistent with the legend of the beaver and the whale. But sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes there's a dispute about what's going on. One of the fundamental beliefs of the Mi'kmaq people, I shouldn't say Mi'kmaq, but many people within the Mi'kmaq community, is that they are the direct descendants of the first settlers here who came here 13,000 years ago, just after the last ice age. That they believe that they occupied this land for the last 13,000 years. And there are archaeologists who believe them, who believe the same thing. I'm not one of them. The evidence to me is very clear. This area has been settled by a number of, at least 5, maybe 6 cultures, distinct cultures, during the last 13,000 years. And the other thing, of course, is the disappearance of the white-tailed deer. The white-tailed deer disappeared here sometime before European contact. There's lots of evidence of white-tailed deer in places where bones survive, such as in clam middens, shell middens, whatever. And but it disappears, and the white-tailed deer is not reintroduced until 1900. After 1900, of course, that's expanded rapidly across. But the white-tailed deer disappeared. And the big question in my mind is why? Why did the white-tailed deer disappear? I don't have a question. I don't have an answer to you, but I will present a hypothesis later. So these questions. Continuity and change is the debate about how long the Mi'kmaq have been here. We need to respectfully discuss these issues, form comprehensive understanding of the past. But it's really important that maybe at some point in the future, a Mi'kmaq archaeologist is invited here to present another point of view than the point of view that I'll be presenting tonight. In this presentation, I'll discuss 3 things. I want to talk about the Knapper's Point site, the Knapper's Point surface collection, and I want to present an evidence-based interpretation of Knapper's Point if there is time. Knapper's Point site. This is it. This is Knapper's Point site. I call it Knapper's Point, and that's my name for it, because of the dense layer of debitage that was on the site when I first found it. Debitage is the remains of making stone tools. If you're on a pre-contact site, you're going to see a whole lot of debitage because it builds up over the years. Some people call it flakes, but there was a dense layer. In some places it was 10 centimeters thick. I found the site just after it eroded out, so I got to see it as it did before it was buried. Knapper's Point's not the official name for the site. I don't use the official name for the site because if I do, people will unintentionally go there and pick 1 or 2 things up, and another person and then another person, and the site will disappear. So I haven't released the actual location of the site, but I can tell you that it's in the backcountry of Kings County in the Gaspereau watershed. These pictures are Knapper's Point North and Knapper's Point South at high water on the top. It's on 2 sides of a waterway. So there's a south side and a north side. If you can, I wonder if I can get my pointer going. I think I can. Did that work? Do I have a pointer? No, it's not working. But the bottom left photo, yes, bottom left, you'll see there's a stump sticking out of the water. That's the end of Knapper's Point. Knapper's Point is covered with water most of the year. And over on the right at the bottom, you'll see a different view. That's from the land out to the stump. I think you might be able to see the stump in the center of the picture. You can see the erosion that has occurred at the site. What's happened here is anthropological erosion. Some years ago, new regulations were put in place to increase the production of Gaspereau. So, Power Corporation, this is all territory, it's all been dammed up and used for hydro development since the 1930s. The Power Corporation was required to put enough water down the fish ladder to increase the survivability of the Gaspereau. The problem with that is that when they did that, it left the water level at Knapper's Point up to a level that during the fall northeast winds and storms, eroded it. That's why I found it. I found it in 1916, in 2016, shortly after it first started to erode it. This is what in situ surface. In situ means as you found it. This is what the artifacts would have looked when I first found them. So when I first found the place, I immediately went to the Mi'kmaq archaeologist, Heather Leslie, told her about the site, and took her and her assistant out to the site, and thought I had an agreement to excavate the site, but it didn't turn out that way. I also went to the Nova Scotia Museum. The Crown owns all this stuff. All artifacts are owned, like minerals, are owned by the province. So I took the province out, the provincial regulators out, and showed them the site. I showed them the erosion, showed the Mi'kmaq the erosion, and pointed out that unless something was done soon, the site's going to get lost. Applied for excavation permits and so on, and of course didn't get them. The last thing that last communication I had with the Mi'kmaq, which was some years ago, is that it is sometimes better from their point of view to let the site disappear than to collect its artifacts. In 2019, September 2019, Hurricane Dorian came in and ripped off a big chunk of the site. It took away a lot of artifacts, including a blocked end pipe, which is a very important Adena artifact from about 2,500 years ago. The province has two. This would have been the third, but I left it there along with several other artifacts on the site, hoping to get permission to excavate, but it didn't come, and Dorian ripped it apart. But new artifacts showed up. I mean, new layers exposed by the storm. So I decided, since the province and the Mi'kmaq were interested in preserving the site, that I would do what I could within the limits of the law to preserve the site. So I made sure I understood the law, and I put on the site a grid, a proper archaeological grid. And I started to photograph, draw, and identify the location of each artifact on the site. And a collector, who I know well, picked up all of the artifacts and kept them safe. The last artifacts eroded out of Knapper's Point in 2022, that's 3 years ago now, and none have eroded out since, so I think the site is essentially destroyed. It might not be. I'd love to do some digging around the edges of it, but I can't get a permit. There may still be some surviving remains, but most of it's been destroyed by anthropological erosion. But we did save what we could, and the collector offered the artifacts to the two local Mi'kmaq bands who did not reply to the offer. So all of the artifacts were turned into the Nova Scotia Museum, along with a full report from me on their location on the site. So essentially, the province and the Mi'kmaq abandoned the site, and I did what I could to preserve it. Why did people live at Knapper's Point for over 4,000 years? Because the artifacts indicate that the first settlers at Knapper's Point arrived there between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. They moved there for two reasons: for the moose and for trade. If you know I guess I should have a better map than what I have up there, but so you've got Gaspro River, then you have the Great Gaspro Gorge that goes up to 15 kilometers from the base of the Gaspro Valley all the way up to Gaspro Lake, which you see when you drive down Highway 12 to New Ross, on the right-hand side, big lake. And you cross Gasper Lake, and you either go north, the North River, up to Aylesford Lake and Lake George, or you can go west, and you can go up 2 Mile Lake, 4 Mile Lake, and then up the West River. It takes you almost all the way out to New Ross, and you can cross over to the Lahave, and you can go down the Lahave to the Atlantic Ocean. So there was trade there pre-contact, and what went south to the South Shore was chert. Chert is a very high quality tool stone, and it's found along the Bay of Fundy shore of the North Mountain and most of the coves, and many of the coves, not all of them, but many of them. And it's the best tool stone in Nova Scotia. And so what the local population did is they made preforms, like you see above the canoe there. Those are preforms. They're an all-purpose stone tool that can be made into any other type of stone tool you want to make of them, or they can serve as a knife, they can serve as a scraper, they can serve as many other things. So eventually, at some time, they would have been a means of exchange. But it's the chert that went south. We know that because the archaeological sites all over the South Shore have lots of North Mountain chert. The other thing is the moose. Big moose country. You've got a huge moose pasture swamp that goes on for miles all around 2 Mile Lake, 4 Mile Lake, all the way up to the end of the West River. Big moose country. The last legal moose, and I'm going to throw this in for a personal reason, the last legal moose killed or hunted out there was in 1937, just before the moose season shut down. And that's Laurie Gibson and his buddy Arch McGinnis, who was my great uncle. This is very near Knapper's Point. They got 2 nice moose. There's the reason why Knapper's Point is there. I mean, it's that moose hunting there was apparently stupendous. My father, who was 7 years old at the time, remembers eating some of the moose. Who were the last people who called Knapper's Point home? Well, this is Fort Edward. You probably recognize it. Fort that you pass when you down the 101 to Halifax, just after you get over the causeway. It's up there on the right. And just down from Fort Edward, I can't get my pointer's not working. My laser pointer is not working. But so if you look to the left of Fort Edward, you see a little structure. That's Isaac the Champ's truck house. A truck house is a fur trading post. That's the language that was used here in the 18th century, 15th century, 17th century. And that's where Isaac the Champ had his truck house, and he traded with the people who once called Knapper's Point home. And he did a census. This census was done, one on the left, 2 pages on the left, was done in, I think, 1763, just at the end of the 7 Years' War. And the other one is a few years later, I think 1767. And it's a census of the people who lived in the Gaspereau, in the Avon, and the Kennecook. At the time, the Amcorettes had the Gaspereau, and they had the Avon, and the Nakoots had the Kennecook River. But this changed a lot. These were very close families. The social structure, the social organization of the Mi'kmaq when contact occurred were small groups, large extended families, small groups but large extended families of 30, maybe 50 people at most, who lived along a particular river. So you were identified with living on a particular river, whether it be the Gaspereau or the Avon or the Kennecook. And that was your river, and you spent the summer down at the mouth of the river near the head of the tide, where there's lots of anadromous fish. Fish is wonderful, easy life, and in the winter, you're in the backcountry hunting and spread out across the lakes and the rivers in the backcountry. I can tell you that the Amcorettes died out. The Amcorettes had both the Gaspereau and the Avon, but They ended their days, I think, up the Avon. I think they starved to death sometime in the early 19th century. If you go up in there, you can see some of their old remains. They were living in, they had more permanent structures than they had earlier. The place is now being developed, so a lot of the remains up in there. If you're on the, if you go up the Avon River on Highway 14 toward Chester, as you just come up off the flats, to go up into the highlands, down to the right is a gorge. That's where they lived, down in that gorge. That gorge goes all the way up to the lakes, but they didn't survive. The Nakoots live on. The Nakoots are now called the Knockwoods, and the Knockwoods are a very successful, large family. Why was Knapper's Point abandoned? The top right photo is of trade goods that were found at Knapper's Point. The only metal that was found at Knapper's Point, axes, and the small piece there is a fragment of a copper kettle, which is one of the prized trade goods at the time. But if you look at I have one of them up here on the table I brought some samples along. I've got one of the axe heads up the table. You'll see that the head of it's been turned over. It's not usable. It's been destroyed. During the 18th century wars, actually it was during King George's War, the 1844 to 1848, joined the Mi'kmaq from this area. There would be the Nakoots and the Amcorets, along with several others, and some of the Acadian resistance, launched 4 attacks on Fort Anne from Port Royal, from Grand Prairie. A series of 4 attacks, unsuccessful, all of them. But the second attack, the governor at Fort Anne, after the first attack, had asked for support, and when the second attack occurred, and they were surrounded by the Mi'kmaq and the Acadian resistance, Gorman's Rangers showed up. Gorman's Rangers were a band of New England Aboriginals, indigenous people, led by New England officers. And they fought the way the Mi'kmaq fought. They didn't fight the way British soldiers fought, because British soldiers were no good outside the forts, useless. So when Gorman's Rangers got to Annapolis, Fort Anne, they went behind enemy lines and they massacred a bunch of women and children and took their scalps. And that was Nova Scotia's introduction to Gorman's Rangers. They spent the next 20 or 30 years in their sailboats and other boats going up and around Nova Scotia and terrorizing the Mi'kmaq population, killing as many as they could find, scalping for the prize. So in 1750, shortly after Halifax was founded, they built a fort at the mouth of the Gaspereau River. You may know where the Curry Farm is today. Big cross is there, the Acadian cross is there. Right at where the Curry Farm is, Gorman's Rangers built a fort. Knapper's Point is only a day and a half upriver from Knapper's Point. So I assume that the destruction of and the abandonment of Knapper's Point occurred following Gorman's Rangers attack. That's just an hypothesis. I need more to make a full conclusion. If they attacked it, sure, dollars to donuts, there are buttons off of their shirts, off of their uniforms, and they could be easily identified if the place was properly excavated and we found their buttons. The letter, or the manuscript on the bottom is from about the last Amcorets I can find in the archives. It was reported by Jonathan Crane, who was applying a number of the Mi'kmaq in the early 1800s who were not doing very well. And that was accounting, and he listed on there one of the Amcorets, one of the last references I could find. The Knockwoods lived on, and they lived, some of the Knockwoods lived out at Gaspereau Lake. And some of you know Henry Dwyer, or knew Henry Dwyer. He died 5 years ago. I interviewed him shortly before he died. who's a friend of my father's, and I had a good interview with him. But his maternal he's the maternal grandson of Stephen Knapper. Henry was born out of Gaspereau Lake, and Henry made a lifelong effort to try to protect the large pre-contact site that was out at the mouth of the Gaspereau. That's where he lived right at the mouth of the Gaspereau River, where the fish ladder is. And he did what he could, and finally succeeded. And they now have a memorial there, that some of you have seen, where, not exactly where Henry's house was, but very close by to where Henry's house was. Henry was the maternal grandson of the last Knockwood who lived there. Let's do some archaeology. Here's the grid that I put on the site back in 2019 after Hurricane Dorian. The green is the forest, tree line. The brownish gray is the site at low water. All of that brownish gray is open at full water. At low water, at high water, it's all covered. So the site is essentially covered at high water. The blue dots are stone tools or lithics, and the red are pottery, and the white is metal. You notice the white is over on the north side, none of it's on the south side, because the south side was abandoned at some point in the pre-contact. Note the difference on the side on the left. Note the difference between the left and the right-hand side of it. Most of the artifacts are well concentrated on the right-hand side, and the pottery is there. There's no pottery on the left-hand side of that because it's more exposed to the northeast wind, and the northeast storms clear off the west side of Knapper's Point more than they do the east side. So the best concentration is on the east side. I did get a permit to do the geophysics. That's no digging, right? I don't need law support to do no dig, as long as you don't dig. So I got a permit from the government to do the geophysics of the site. I do magnetic susceptibility, which tries to measure variation in the how susceptible the soil is to being magnetized. That's important because whenever you burn something, or whether you prepare foods, throw food out and so on, you add iron oxide to the soil. So essentially what you can see with a proper magnetic susceptibility survey is the hearths and wigwam floors of the people who used to live there. So there is the view of where the hearths and wigwams were at one time at this point, north and south. I should say on the north side, some of the really high readings on the north side, because there's metal over there, some of that's metal, and it's metal that you have to excavate to recover. Probably more kettles and stuff like that. There's the two. Again, you can see the on the left-hand slide. You can see the concentration of the geophysics and the artifacts, and of course that guides where you want to dig. I mean, if you're going to dig this site, you're going to start there. But you might also want to get some of the high points, the high red stuff. I should have mentioned this. Yellow means almost nothing is there, right? And the redder it is, the higher the likelihood that that is a wigwam floor or a hearth. So it's all ready to go for excavation, but it won't be excavated by me. Knapper Point's artifacts. I use the Andreski approach, which means that I focus on morphology or shape rather than function. So a projectile point is a hefty biface. So apologize, but that's the standard way in which most universities, academic programs, characterize their artifacts, the Andreski approach. The Knapper's Point assemblage includes, this is what it includes. It includes 112 stone tool fragments and stone tools, 92 pieces of debitage. I included the debitage from 1 square meter of the site. I mean, there's hundreds of square meters on the site, but this is 1 square meter, and the 92 off of the surface, not under, off of the surface of the site. So it gives you an idea of how much debitage is out there. 16 pottery groups containing 97 pottery sherds. A pottery group for me is a pottery that's within a 20 centimeter diameter circle. That seems to work pretty good. And of course, metal goods, 3 metal goods. And I want to draw your attention, a lot of people don't know what pottery looks like in the field. The middle photo on the right, that's all pottery. You don't get pots, you get pieces of broken pottery. And on a muddy site, or a muddy day, or a wet day, it's hard to see them. Ground stone tools. I'm going to quickly go through the assemblage. This is ground stone tools made by grinding one stone against another. Ground stone tools are older. These ground stone tools are in the range of likely 4,000 to 5,000 years old, maybe a bit more than that. The most important one, they're not in good shape. You can see it. A lot of this stuff, I don't like to say garbage because maybe I'll get upset when I do that. But it's stuff that people throw away. And you can see bits and pieces and fragments. But on the left-hand photo, at the top right, you can see a hefty biface. Now, that's not a museum piece. That is a 6-sided ground stone hefty biface. And it's a classic late archaic. That means here that means between 4,000 and 5,000 years old. Point. Now beside it is an abrader, and on the other side of that, on the left at the top, is another type of abrader. The only other abrader I've seen like that was at Boswell. Boswell is a really interesting site on the Annapolis River. We had good stratification, we had good dating, and that type of abrader, you can see where Buddy tried to drill a hole in the top of it. That was to suspend it from his neck, so he could use it to abrade a point on, before you strike stone to flake off something out. You have to have a point of percussion, and you have to put it in a certain place. And so those abrading tools are used to do that. The 3 long, slender items below that are classic late archaic tools. They're not in very good shape. Fragments, best I could do. But the word for it, I hate it. They call them bayonets, but that's what they were called when they were first found many decades ago. And the rest of it is oh, I should talk about the ulus. The top, on the right, the top one is an ulu. That's a type of cutting tool. And just below it, I got it upside down, but I've got a ridged ulu. A ridged ulu is a classic late archaic tool. So these tools collectively verify that this site was probably occupied during the late archaic, between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. I got debitage or flakes on the right. That's byproducts of making stone tools. And notice the white stuff on the lower right. That's quartz. Quartz was the lowest quality stone tool stone. The best quality, of course, as I've already mentioned, is chert. Most of the rest of that is chert. And what isn't chert is quartzite from white rock. White rock is ready to, you have to go through white rock to get up to Gaspereau Lake if you're walking. So, on the right are biface tips and midsections. A biface is simply a tool that has been flaked on both sides. And those are all biface. The tips and midsection aren't very diagnostic. But here are these are the hefty bifaces or projectile points from the surface of Knapper's Point. They're often the most frequent, usually around 50% of the stone tools you're going to find on a site. Now functionally, they range to cover, some of them were spear points, some of them were, and after 3,000 years ago when the bow and arrow arrived here, it didn't arrive here to 3,000 years ago. tipped arrows. Others were knives, others were drills, others were some type of cutting or tool. They were an all-purpose tool. So I've set them up here so that the ones on the left are notched. There's two types of notched, and you'll see the difference if you go up and look on the examples I have here with us tonight. There's a difference between a side notch and a corner notch, big difference. In the middle are the stemmed points, and on the right are the unstemmed, unnotched, and they are almost universally knives. You can see the big meat cleaver on the upper right on the far side, and right beside it is a very nice quartzite. It's a white rock quartzite knife, very well made. Unhafted bifaces, thin ones and thick ones. I'm not going to go into detail because I know I'm going to run out of time. So I'm going to skip over this very quickly, but preforms are really important. The ones on the left are preforms, very important, the all-purpose tool that I mentioned earlier. Flake tools. Flake tools are only flaked on one side. And on the other side they're flat. And most flake tools are scrapers, cutters, and incisors of some kind. And on the right is a hammerstone. Hammerstone's used to make stone tools. You can see this one's been well used. This is from Knapper's point, and it's been well used. Pottery's on the left. Pottery, excuse me, pottery at Knapper's point starts about 2,200 years ago and goes to just before contact. Pottery is classified by its different types. There's 3 different types up there. I won't go into it, but they occupy different ranges of time from 2,200 years ago to just before contact at 500 years ago. And on the right, of course, are the metal tools that I've already talked about, and my hypothesis about forms ranges. All right, interpretation. I'm going to do this very quickly, and I could spend days doing this, but you can hear me drone on for days. The first step is to divide time up into reasonable periods. Archaeology in North America recognizes 3 major periods. The Paleo period, the very first period, from about 13,000 years ago to about 8,000 years ago, just after the last ice age. The primary technology during the Paleo period was a thrusting spear. They had thrusting spears, so they were mainly caribou. In this neck of the woods, they were mainly caribou people. They were here when this was tundra. This was just after the last ice age, and they were here for maybe 800, maybe 1,000 years before they disappeared. The Archaic period, the primary technology is the atlatl, or throwing spear. You can see an atlatl there. He's going to take a deer, perhaps. From 10,000 to 3,000 years ago, that's 7,000 years. That's a long time for a period. And during that period, the atlatl developed in many different ways: short ones, long ones, big ones, little ones. Atlatls for this and atlatls for that. But the atlatl was the primary technology used in it. It increased the population of the archaic period people. On the right, the ceramic or woodland period, 3,000 years ago to about 450 years ago, which is when European contact starts at 500 AD. Some people call it ceramic period, I call it the woodland period. This is a time of great change. On the Mississippi, agriculture is expanding rapidly, and with it, population. And for the first time, we see ceramic or pottery showing up in American lands. Those are the 3 periods. And it's important to understand that to do this. What I'm going to try to do is do a chronology with the artifacts from Knapper's point. I got lots of question marks here because usually when you do a chronology, when you do a good chronology, you don't just have artifacts, you've got stratigraphy and you've got radiocarbon dates. Stratigraphy is is the layers that you uncover as you excavate. And if you find something on top of something else, then the stuff that's on top is younger than the stuff that's underneath. So you already have stratigraphy, you know what came first, second, and third. And with radiocarbon dates, you usually confirm that. But I don't have radiocarbon, this is scatter, surface scatter. I don't have radiocarbon dates, don't have stratigraphy, so big question marks on what I'm presenting here. Very provisional. But I'm happy with what I've done here. I can tell you that there are no paleo artifacts at Knapper's Point. And I can tell you the paleos disappeared. We don't know what happened to them for sure, but they disappeared. They disappeared as the climate warmed. We had the rapid warming period here after about 12,000, or beginning around 12,000 years ago, rapid warming, and the environment changed from a tundra to a spruce forest very quickly. One of the theories is, of course, that the paleo could not adapt to the new environment. They did not change their technology to adapt to a warming climate. I don't think most of you in this room probably already know about other cultures that have not adapted well to warming climates. We don't need to go into that to much extent, but these folks just disappeared because they didn't adapt through technological change. But that wasn't the same all across the paleo cultures. Down in the southeast of the United States, I will call it the southeast of the United States today, the atlatl arose. And the atlatl spread all over North America within the next 1,000 years. And what we see with the atlatl, and with any change in technology, whether it be the atlatl or agriculture or industrialization, when you have major technological changes, you get a population bloom. So we get a population bloom. When you get a population bloom, you get oat migration. And so the archaic slowly migrates up the east coast of the United States, and we finally get archaic culture showing up in the backwoods of Kings County somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. So it took, 5,000 years for that technology to finally arrive here. But it did finally arrive. I'm going to say very little about the terminal archaic, other than we don't have much terminal archaic on the site. There's a site close by that's got a lot on it. It's a single component, so it's a very interesting site. But the site has not been reported yet to the province nor to the Mi'kmaq. The woodland is a very different period than everything else. We're not talking about climate change here. Oh, I'm sorry, I should go back up a bit. The archaic period, they didn't finish the archaic period. What happened to the archaic? Well, this warming period that starts with the paleo, way back about 12,000 years ago, carries on. And it carries on at unbelievable, of course, but it reaches a peak about 5,000 years ago. And at 5,000 years ago, Nova Scotia had a climate and a natural environment the same as you'd find in North and South Carolina right now. We had a Carolinian climate here, very different than what we have here today. And this warming climate was the technology that the late archaic people were using and the climate matched, and so we had this expansion. But beginning 5,000 years ago, it started to get colder, and it started to get wetter. Now I'm telling this story very quickly, so it sounds like it's happening very quickly, but it isn't. It peaked at 5,000, but it took 2,000 years, from 5,000 years ago to 3,000 years ago, for that cooling to happen. It cooled slowly, gradually, cooler, got wetter and wetter, wetter. Ian Spooner at Acadian University is one of the archaeologists, one of the geologists who did a lot of work in this area and was able to demonstrate clearly that this is what happened from about 5,000 to about 3,000 years ago. Things got cooler and they got wetter. And during that time, what happened? The archaic did not adjust. They did not adjust their technology. They did not change. They were stuck in their traditional ways, and did not modify their technology. So you can see it in the archaeological record all the way from, they expanded all the way to northern Labrador, and they collapsed all the way down the Labrador coast, completely out of Newfoundland. They were all over Newfoundland, out of Newfoundland. And the speculation is that they contracted as far south as Carolina, where the Carolinian forest was. Of course, the other story, the continuity story, is that a few of them hung on here and continued to live here and provided, or ancestral to the current Mi'kmaq population. So we get the archaic collapse. It's not really a collapse because it happened over 2,000 years, and that's a long time. It's more of a contraction, a slow contraction. The woodland period is very different. It's not about climate change. It's about technological change. We had this agricultural revolution happening on the Mississippi and its tributaries, and it's massive. And whenever agriculture arose in prehistory, you get this huge population bloom. And when you get this huge population bloom, you get out-migration all around the Mississippi. And so the Meadowwood, who they started around Great Lakes, southern Ontario, lower Great Lakes around southern Ontario and upper New York State, lower St. Lawrence, and they expanded into here between 3,000 years ago and 2,500 years ago. And I think that these artifacts that I'm showing you here on the next to Meadowwood are Meadowwoods. Meadowwoods stand out very distinctly because they have side notches and they are very well flaked, very well made. The one on the left, that's out of quartz, and to make a thin quartz projectile point or biface is nothing short of a miracle. Almost no one. They were excellent stonemasons. The one on the far right, there's half a dozen, 8 different ways of mathematical ways of distinguishing between atlatl points and arrowheads. So I combined them all into a computer program, ran these points through the computer program, and the only arrowhead is that one on the far right. You can hardly see its indentations. It's not just that they are there. And that's the proof of the first bow and arrow at Knapper, at Gaspereau, up in the Gaspereau system. It shows up between 3,000 and 2,500 years ago. Point Peninsula is a huge in-migration, huger than the wet Meadowwood. It just came in and within a few hundred years covered everything all over the Maritimes, and with their pottery and with their points. And they have the classic quarter-notched points that you see there. You'll see some on the table. And that's mainly what Knapper's Point is about. The vast majority of the artifacts at Knapper's Point are these Point Peninsula artifacts and Point Peninsula pottery. And you'll see, you can see how population expands from in the Gaspereau because you get more artifacts as you come through time. But what's driving this whole thing is this huge population bubble that's caused by agriculture. Pales in importance, though, to the huge population expansion that we're experiencing now. We're now at 9 billion and counting. Post-European contact starts 1500 with trading with the fishermen. It expands from there. These are trade goods that were found on the site, and I told the story about the rangers. So one thing I should have mentioned about the woodland period that I didn't, I forgot when I'm looking here at my notes. One of the things that's controversial is that my research is I estimate population dynamics, population fluctuations using proxies. And I published some of this work recently. And my work shows that there was a population contraction during the woodland period after 1,800 years ago, a slow, gradual contraction. So what is that all about? And so one of the hypotheses about that is, well, the bow and arrow's been introduced, and you've got this huge population through in-migration due to the agricultural revolution in the Mississippi, and you've got the bow and arrow, and the white-tailed deer starts to disappear, and sometime prior to contact, it's extinct. So that suggests overpopulation and environmental degradation. Now, that's not something that the Mi'kmaq are very comfortable with, and they would have a problem with that. But that's what the evidence that I can see says. I would argue we're all the same. We're all destroying this planet just as quickly as anybody else. I don't think that the current leadership is much different than the leadership today, which is coming back on efforts to control climate change. Thank you. I've introduced Knapper's Point. I've reviewed its artifacts. I've presented a brief interpretation of the site using climate change, technological change, and population fluctuations to explain the artifacts. I know I've been very quickly. There's much more to say. You've been a very patient audience to listen to me drone through this. I'd like to thank you for your attention and tolerance.
Does anyone